Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben.
Yeah, you are.
Hi.
I think.
Hello.
Or so I've been told.
We take a week off and I forget.
Let me check my underwear real quick. I think my name's written in here.
Yes, I signed my underwear in shit stains.
And the impressive part, though, is it's cursive.
Yeah, I have very neat butt writing. Shit is gross. Yeah, welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. Sorry we didn't have an episode last week. I had a laundry machine being delivered, and there's literally 1 hour of my week where they could deliver it and fuck something up, and they picked that hour, which was the show.
They really wanted to be on the show, like they're fans. They're like, oh man, this is our shot.
No, it's always stressful having any work done, or like anytime you have people around the house, because my dogs are just monsters and they don't.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about that part of being a pet owner.
So I literally spent the entire hour here. They were setting shit up, just trying to keep my dogs calm and playing with them outside.
Yeah.
And while that was happening, apparently they broke our fucking ceiling light trying to get the thing in.
Cool.
But it's fine now, because now I have a dryer that doesn't take 6 hours to dry a fucking load of laundry.
I remember those days. The frustrating thing, well, and it's probably because I probably just need to check my dryer line. Our current dryer is only like 2.5 years old, and it's like already to that point where you kind of have to run it twice if there's anything thick in there, like a towel or something. But for the most part, it does pretty good. But at our old house, the dryer was ancient, and you'd have to run it like 4 times. And what never made sense to me is that the clothes would come out at like 4,000 degrees, but sopping wet.
Yeah, there was like a protective barrier around the water. Yeah, this one was here when we moved into the house, and I've always thought it was like the fan that's in the dryer. It's supposed to, propel heat out. I always thought that was busted, but considering the shape this house was in when the previous owner left it, I wouldn't be surprised if he just ripped out a bunch of parts he thought he could pawn.
Yeah,
and so by some miracle, the dryer still technically ran for the last 3 years.
You weren't using a dryer; it was one of those paint shakers.
We're totally like, well, beggars can't be choosers.
Well, yeah,
that's not
especially in the middle
true.
of the move.
That's not true, because I've been saying for years, "Can we please get a new dryer? This sucks. I'll pay for it." But finally, we were like, okay, this one's making a really loud banging sound, so it could explode, and we need to...
And the weird thing is, when you say banging sound, you don't mean like it's thumping. You mean like 2 people having sex. It was just like moaning and...
Yeah, every time I hit the power switch, you hear, and it's like...
You're like, well, this is kind of hot.
Can't fucking... 2 more nights, and then we get a new one.
I don't know what you're doing, machine, but you're not drying my clothes.
No, you're ruining them. I have to wash again, you shit.
And it takes a lot to get those cursive shit stains out of underwear, so...
Yeah. I gotta do a new one after every wash. Because then I forget.
Circle back around on that weird joke.
It's the circle of life. It's the circle of my life. Yeah, welcome to the show. I don't remember what we do here. It's the
nobody's ever told us. We just like somebody showed up one day and gave us both microphones.
It's
like,
here's the Non-Essential Podcast.
Here's the record button. Go, and we were both just like,
talk too much.
Well, too much. Yes, that's our number one complaint. It's like, why do these guys talk so much? Like,
and boy, our
show could be like 5 minutes long, but
it's like going to a painting, installation or something and be like, how long do I have to look at this? Can't you just tell me?
I like the idea of trying to convince people, like, just give it time, it'll make sense. It's like one of those magic eye posters. You stare at it long enough and the 3D image will pop out.
Yeah, we are the snooty fucking bullshit non-art of the podcast space. We are the equivalent of like somebody just sitting an apple on a desk and telling you it's about capitalism.
Capital Apple.
Yeah. Capitalism.
Yeah.
The capital apple.
I like it. Anytime there's that alliterative like quality, even though it's not like the same letter, it's the same like vowel repeat or whatever.
And his nemesis, Crapple.
Crapple.
Look at it. That's a cartoon. Yeah.
Capital Apple versus Crapple.
Yeah. And they get into hijinks.
Hijinks, yes. Very family friendly.
So yeah, on the show we tell each other stories. They can be about anything. They're usually about nothing.
This week could truly be about anything. I said something on Twitter about it, but so last week, like right before you messaged and were like, hey, this delivery got like kind of moved and it's going to fuck everything up. Do you mind if we like skip it or reschedule? And I was like, skip is great. Right before that, though, I was like, well, I don't have a fucking topic and I want to have a topic. So I had put something together and I think it was good. I remember it like being kind of excited, like, yeah, that came together. In the week since then, I have completely forgotten what the fuck I was going to talk about. And because there was some weirdness going on with my Google account, I talked to you a little bit about that through Twitter DMs. Like, I at least signed into my Drive to make sure I still could get my fucking notes, because that was kind of a question. But they're there, and I'm like, I kind of decided, like, midway through the day today, I'm like, I could, like, refresh my memory, but that sucks. Like, I want to be as surprised as you are. So I was like, well, when I sign in, though, to check my Google Drive, I'll at least see the like title of the document, and that'll bring it back. It did not bring it back. I still don't. I didn't open it because I wanted that part to be a surprise. But
it's funny because I hear that, and all I think is like, man, he's gonna like have more trouble reading it now. he's not ready.
Oh, yeah. Well, the thing is, like, usually my notes are named after the person because it just, like, you use Google Docs, I think, or you have. You don't.
I have, but I don't use it for the show except sending I use the Drive to send you the file, and that's it.
Yeah. I use it because I do, like, half my work at work and half the work at home, and it's just easy. But what it tends to do, if you start typing something and you haven't titled the document, it'll just put, like, whatever your first sentence is as the title. So when I saw the title, I'm like, I don't remember what this is about, but that name, I'll probably stumble under it. Although I do remember what it's about now, because when I see the full title, I like actually subtitled it, and now it's brought it all rushing back. And I do think
titled Steve Gibson. Before he lost his memory.
Steve Gibson, remember to finish these notes later. They're incomplete. Fuck.
What if you had that where it's like you knew you were going to lose your memory, so you had to write yourself a reminder of who you are?
Yeah, it's like that 50 First Dates thing almost, except you write them to yourself every day.
Yeah.
Although I think she kind of did that too, but...
No, he did that for her. I think her dad did it or something. I don't remember that movie very well. But to me, it was like, if it was to myself, it would just be like, you fucking idiot. How could you forget all this shit?
I keep trying to remind you to buy a gun and end it all, and you keep forgetting.
Yeah.
And by the time you realize what's going on, it's too late.
How do you remember what Wendy's is, but you don't know how to buy a firearm? Like, when I instruct you to, but you remember the number 2 combo.
There's just one gun store owner out there that's loving the fact that you go in and put down like your $50 deposit and you wait for the 3-day waiting period every single day, because every day you forget you've already done that.
So you've just been buying a new gun every day and never
getting it. Right.
Well, yeah, the next fucking crime they can't solve is like, well, there is one guy who has 275 firearms. They're all a match.
All identical. And looking at his bank records, he's broke as fuck. It's got to be him robbing these banks.
Nothing to lose.
Yeah. Anyway.
Anywho.
So I do apparently have a topic.
I don't believe you. We'll see by the end of the show.
Yeah. That's true.
I'll be the judge of that.
That's fair. There have been weeks where I get to the end of my notes, I'm like, eh.
Well, that didn't pan out.
I tried. Okay, with his thick, trim beard and a face to keep it on, Irish-Italian detective Jerome Caminada was not an ugly man. This really has nothing to do with the rest of the story. It's just like, yeah, I'm going to start this off awkwardly.
I got to sidetrack immediately. I'm sorry. But I was watching, this won't surprise you, I was watching a Ted Bundy documentary last night. And something that always comes up when they talk about the serial killer Ted Bundy is, for some reason, people always point out how handsome he was.
What I love about that, because that's very common among serial killers, and just like bad people in general. And they're like, oh, yeah, the thing is, he got away with it because the women loved him. He was just so fucking hot. They saw him and they just had to have sex with him. And then they show a picture of him and you're like, what the fuck? That's nice.
And Ted Bundy, he was like a fucking creepy golem creature with a unibrow. Like, I don't fucking...
Right. And then that's when you want to, like, because it's one of those things... Women have it so much worse, but guys have like these unrealistic standards too, where they show like all these, like, one of my biggest pet peeves is when they're like, oh, but dad bods are hot now. It's like, but what you call a dad bod is what I would have after 6 years at the gym every fucking day. Like, your dad bod is still pretty fucking like, it takes some work. But that part, you're like, but I get it. I'm lazy, I eat bad, and I don't work out. So that's fair.
I reap what I sow.
But then when they're like, oh, but this guy was a real lady killer, and they show him, and you're like, what the fuck? Yeah. Like, I don't understand anything other than apparently beauty standard is everything that, as long as you don't look like Steve. I don't get it.
But so that shit always comes across in these documentaries. It's usually psychiatrists and shit who, you know, are just analyzing the case. They usually bring that shit up. I honestly believe they're probably, like I said, he was a weird fucking looking dude. Even if he hadn't killed anybody, I'd be this mean to him. But what was weird about this case was there was this guy who was like a classmate or something of his in college. And he looked like that bald, like dummy King of the Hill character, the neighbor.
Bill.
Bill. But he had like glasses. And he said something about like how he's like, you know, you look at him and, you know, probably I would look at him and, you know, be jealous of how good he looks. And it's like, you do know he killed people, right? Like he takes a really awkward time to like compliment how handsome and charming Ted Bundy was.
See, maybe that was the key, because I
wish I could be more like him.
Yeah, I had to look him up to remember exactly what he looks like. And he's not like the world's ugliest guy by any means, but he's like the world's most average looking guy. So maybe that's the key.
I think when you're a serial killer, though, you kind of age into your, like, the inner part of you comes out. So maybe Ted Bundy in college wasn't too bad when it started. By the time they caught him...
Well, that's the thing. That's fair, too.
He looked the part. He was a method actor.
That's fair, too. Looking at his pictures, it was hard. Like, I had to double check some of the captions. Like, this is the same guy.
Yeah.
So, Anyway... Jerome worked the streets of Victorian era Manchester, if you know what I mean, which you don't, because
yeah, boy.
It's estimated that during his career as a law enforcement officer, he was responsible for as many as 1,200 arrests.
1,200 murders.
Probably, given like Victorian era jail, where they just like threw you in a pit of shit and
where
like, good luck.
Where like bopping them on the head with your fucking billy club counted as an arrest,
right?
Even if they didn't get up afterwards.
He quit moving, so he's arrested. Mission accomplished.
My friend, you're nicked.
Nicked. You've said that before, and I love it every time because I don't think of that and I should.
I do when I think old-timey detective justice.
So now you might be saying that such a number probably means he was overzealous and unjust, and maybe you're right, but I don't want to be sued by any surviving descendants, so I'll just like point out that I didn't find anything to suggest that. This isn't a story about like this crooked cop that was just like...
This renegade cop.
Right. It's not that kind of story, but it doesn't mean he wasn't. It just means that's not what this particular story is about.
I don't know why you're like bothering with like clarification. If anybody ever tried to like get litigious with us, would be like, I pulled it out of my ass. It's a fiction show.
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why I'm doing it. It's not because of that. It's because I was padding my notes. It's not necessarily a long topic, although I didn't count on a discussion of like Ted Bundy's attractiveness or lack thereof.
That's on you. You know, you have worked with me for a long time.
It's fair enough.
If you don't know how this goes.
So Officer Jerome was known for using his keen sense of deduction and intellect, I can't read my own words, and wit, which I don't have any of.
And grit.
But like all bobbies, which is what England calls policemen for some reason, Caminada didn't start at the top. Growing up a poor boy on the rough streets had hardened Jerome, and he would need that experience as he transitioned from boy to police guy. I don't know what the voice is. I'm bored.
One man, one police guy.
Jerome was tough. During one of his first days on the job, he got punched in the face, toughly. He also once got beaten with his own umbrella, which just further proved his toughness, I guess. It was really fucking weird because I found like 3 or 4 different sources that are like, Jerome was tough. He wasn't afraid of a fight. And to prove it, he got his ass kicked all the fucking times. Right. I was like, well, maybe
you should have been afraid.
I'm thinking maybe resilient is the better word than tough.
I mean, you can... There is something tough about like being willing to get your ass kicked repeatedly.
Right, but you'd think they'd at least throw like one story in there about him winning a fight. Literally, every proof of his toughness was him losing fights. And it's like, okay, did he win it all? Like, did he try or what? I don't know.
I like to think that's like just he had a string of bad luck where he slipped on a banana peel just before every fight started.
That's how he got off his arrest. The bad guys were just like laughing their asses off, and he was like able to just put the shackles on him or whatever they used back then. The
shackles.
The shackles. In a back way, like nowadays cops carry like 13 pairs of handcuffs plus all those zip ties, and back then they had like 87 pounds worth.
Yeah, I think cops should have to go back to those old like when you were arresting pirates, you needed a fucking 50-pound chain.
It was kind of like a punishment for both of you. It's like, I'm gonna have to drag you around by this heavy ass thing.
I need a fucking hammer to arrest you. Awesome.
Hold on, any of you people in the crowd a welder, please?
For the love of God, don't look directly at it while I'm doing this. You're under arrest.
So there wasn't any real training to be a police bobby back in those days, but Jerome had the gumption and ingenuity and soon developed his own methods for taking down the bigger criminals. So he wasn't just like taking on these like ruffians in the street that kept kicking his ass, but he was going after like crime lords or whatever they had in Victorian England. So when he wasn't...
Sorry, but you said he ends up a detective, right?
Yes.
So there you go.
Yeah. When he wasn't busy getting his ass kicked, he would wander the cell blocks of the local jail, memorizing the faces of criminals that were about to be released. It's thought that he had a eidetic memory, what do they call it? Just a photo, whatever. It's late here. He could remember things very well.
He thought good.
Photographic memory would be the word. Clearly, I don't have that either. I am not Jerome. I know some of you are jumping to that conclusion
That's the
already.
twist, yeah.
Yes. So he'd like memorize their faces. That way, when he'd see them on the streets, he'd know to look out for them. This technique is also known as profiling and is still popular among cops and unpopular among basically everybody else.
Basically every civil rights group on the fucking planet.
But apparently he's like must be one of the forefathers that like nobody else thought to do it. And he's like, I'm going to look at the criminals. And when I see him, I'll be like, ha, criminal. He must be criming.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, back then, profiling was probably a little more safe to do because it's like, instead of like profiling based off racial traits or something, it's like, well, that's Evan, he lives
there was a lot of the racial trait stuff too.
He lives 2 streets away. I mean, I'm sure that was there, but I mean, like, if it's a smaller knit community, you can be more like, I'm not remembering things about him. I'm remembering you because you live 10 houses down, you son of a bitch.
That's the thing, too. In a situation, depending on how you're doing it, the way that they described it, I kind of put that profiling thing in there just because I wanted that line about how it's still used in whatever. But there is a fine line there because if you're like, oh, this guy's a rapist and he's getting let out, and then 3 days later you have a rape 2 doors down, it's not unfair to go question him. Say, hey, I mean, by the way, where were you?
There is an element of that is justified in the justice system today, where it's if you're a fucking sex pest, the state doesn't just automatically forget that. And
right, and they shouldn't.
And they shouldn't. So yeah, maybe you're not in jail anymore, but they're going to know what the fuck you're capable of where you go. So
this is Nick. He nicks knickers.
Yeah.
And we've got knickers on the loose.
Well, that's just a name. I wish I could be a better person, but if I heard your name's Nick Knickers, I'm going to assume the worst and protect my family.
And Nick the knicker.
And I'm going to protect my knickers.
Yeah. Caminada often went undercover, posing as a door-to-door salesman or a priest. And I like to think that I kind of went off into my own little world here. A lot of times, if you haven't noticed over the last 12 years, I'll just jump into these scenes in my head, and I had to share them with the rest of you. So, I imagine this guy knocking on some criminal's door, dressed as a salesman, going, "Excuse me, I'm the criminal implements man. Would you lads like to buy any crime tools? What kind of criming are you up to? I probably have the goods to help you with your crimes. Just, tell me what you've been committing." I don't know how posing as a door-to-door salesman necessarily gives you this, great detective upper hand other than that. You're just probably not quite that, but you're yeah, I'm going door to door selling apples, and you become chummy. You're yeah, oh, now that we know each other so well, have you done anything illegal? I just don't know how you transition that conversation. Or the priest one. It's
crime, perhaps.
I specialize in door to door confessionals. Do you have any sins to confess? Wait, no, not idolizing or adultery. Any kind of crimey sins.
Yeah,
that's what I specialize in.
You're absolved now. Tell me where the body is.
For some reason, and what tool you use specifically. But apparently it worked.
Commit a murder for the Lord.
Well, shit. I can lie to the bobbies, but not to a priest. One article I read said that Caminada was known to take down fraudulent doctors by posing as a patient in order to receive their good-for-nothing treatments and tonics, thus proving that they were frauds. Which, again, that's not a bad idea, but the fact that this was considered groundbreaking police work, we've never thought of that. Pretend to be sick. Brilliant. Before they must have just been going up to the doctors hey, are you doing any fraud? No? Well, fuck.
There probably were some cops like that where it's this method doesn't have any honor.
Right. Kind of like when we went away from like the lining up tactics in the military. Like, instead of standing in front of the enemy's guns, let's hide.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, that is dishonorable.
Yeah, and British are like, what the fuck, you cowards?
We can't aim.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Well, yeah, god damn, like it's old hat to like fucking go after, but like, what the fuck? What messed up concept? Like, war's already fucked up. To turn it into this fucked up, like, I want human chess pieces.
Well, and it's 1,000%. Like, they're used to being able to win strictly by numbers, and then they think it's unfair that one thing no longer guarantees them or almost guarantees them victory. They're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
we have to be smart now.
Say what you will about America, but we knew that war should be for the most talented, not the most numerous.
Yeah, and I would also point out, too, that we, as much as we like to pretend, we did not invent guerrilla warfare, and there were other people that were able to repel, European armies based on similar tactics. But the point remains that, like, up to the Revolutionary War, they were still, like, mind-boggled when
I'm just saying
America
was the first group of people, first nation to say, oh, we could put a white man in the bush.
Weird. Like, we may be able to do this without getting a bunch of our own people killed. They may enjoy that.
Oh my God. We might stand a chance.
So, yeah. Anyway, just posing as a sick patient and going after doctors. Brilliant work. But these kind of investigatory innovations aren't the reason why at least one person started calling him Jerome Holmes. And I'm that one person, and probably the only person. In fact, I didn't really qualify that horrible joke. That's the theme here. This guy is basically like known as the real life Sherlock Holmes.
That's
partly based on this stuff that we've already talked about. If you've read Sherlock Holmes, you'll be like, wait a minute, that seems like a leap. But there's more. There's actually two specific cases that I read about. There's more than that, but two ones that come up over and over again where people say that, like, this guy's life was ripped right out of the pages of a book written by, I think it was Sir Arthur Conan O'Brien.
Yep.
Probably the biggest caper he ever solved was the case of the Manchester Cab mystery. They really fucking sucked at writing, like, newspaper.
Man, that's about on par with Sherlock Holmes stories.
Yeah.
How they're titled.
The Whodunit of Burberry Lane.
The case of the fucking murder in Pottersville.
So, on the night of February 26, 1889, a well-to-do businessman named John Fletcher hailed a cab from the steps of Manchester Cathedral. He boarded the coach with an unidentified younger gentleman, but an hour later, the cab was still stuck in rush-hour London traffic, apparently. I guess there was, like, a parade or something going on, and so that kind of frustration existing way back in, well, I guess not way back, but almost 150 years ago. I kind of like that idea of, like, fucking parades, get out of the way, my horse needs to get through. Anyway, they were stuck in traffic. This is when a passerby alerted the cab driver that, and I quote, "One of your passengers has scarpered off, he did."
Scarpered?
Scarpered.
No,
yeah, the English are
he
fucking...
didn't. Don't fucking ever tell me one of my people scarpered.
Scarpered off. I had to double check that, and it's like, it means scampered or ran off. I'm like, well, then say scampered or ran off. Scarpered is stupid.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's England, and I don't care if it's the 1800s. Don't use scarpered. Yeah, it's not a word.
I often hear, like, British celebrities in interviews and stuff say, we made the language. It's like, yeah, and we made it fucking makes sense.
Yeah, we fixed it. Thank you very much.
What the fuck does scarpered mean, you maniacs?
You guys also invented...
You just said whatever fucking sounded good when you were drunk and then decided it's a word. That's not...
That's the thing, is it was always scampered. It was just some drunkard at the pub couldn't say or scarpered, and they're like...
Yeah, between vomit, you know.
And then when somebody tried to correct him, he's like, fuck you, scarpered's a word too. Look it up when they invent the dictionary in 100 years.
Scarper.
So again, in plain English, it just means the young man hopped out and ran away, and that the passerby is a dirty snitch.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that anybody would see that and be like, oh, cab driver, somebody ran off. I'd be like, okay, so what? Like, as far as anybody else knew, there was still somebody in the cab, so it's not like he ran off without paying a fare. It's like, well, another guy's still...
That is something I've noticed in, like, old-timey movies and shit, is there's usually some busybody to be, like... Not even knowing there's something going on, they'll just be like, yeah, they'll just be like, he's standing there. It's like, well, that's none of your business.
Right. Unfortunately for the businessman, John, he was still in the cab, but also dead. Police found no signs of trauma on the body, but did notice that some of his valuables were missing. This, not the man running away and leaving a dead body behind, was their first clue that they just might be looking at a crime of some sort. But what?
Well, we'll have to take him to the hospital. He might be dead.
Yeah, they're like, well, one guy ran off without paying a fare. We'll get to him later. This other guy's dead. Something may be up here. Wait a minute, his stuff is missing. Now we're putting 2 and 2 together, but we don't know what it adds up to. Let's call in Jerome. No. He's the detective slash mathematician.
5 minutes to light up my curly pipe to come to the conclusion that there's been a crime committed.
We don't know what yet, though. Like, that's how they all...
I feel it in my bones.
Let's examine the clues more closely, gentlemen. So, of course, Caminada was brought in. The coroner found chloral hydrate in the victim's stomach. This was a chemical often used in prize fighting to subdue an opponent in order to rig a match. So basically, it's like almost like a date rape drug. Like, they would slip it to a boxer before a match, and he'd fall asleep halfway through, and they'd be like, yeah, KO, knocked out. I know we haven't actually started yet, and I haven't thrown a punch. That's how good I am. If he starts vomiting, it's because I hit him so hard in my mind. Caminada also interviewed witnesses and was given the piece of evidence he'll need to pull a Columbo-style one more thing off, but we'll get to that later. Because it's only good if you do it the Columbo-style one more thing. Caminada was aware of a recent theft of chloral hydrate from a druggist in Liverpool, which that is one thing. We were making fun of the English language. Pharmacists should still be fucking called druggists. It's way cooler. Like, I probably would have studied harder in school if I knew I could, not go to med school but become a druggist.
Well, pharmacist is a profession. Druggist is a way of life.
That's true. There's a lot of druggists in my town.
Yeah.
Upon traveling to Liverpool to investigate this druggist burglary of chloral hydrate, Caminada found 2 other victims which had been drugged and robbed but not murder-killed, while out with a young man named Charlie Parton. So 2 druggings and thefts could be a coincidence, but 3, that's what makes a pattern. So Caminada put 1 + 1 + 1 together. I did a lot of math in my notes. And declared that Charlie Parton was the murder thief. At the trial, medical experts failed to agree on what actually killed John, which is weird to me. They're like, he died with no physical traces of anything and a bunch of this drug in his stomach. But what could have done it?
A broken heart.
Yes. That's when Caminada, presumably made like he was heading for the exit, turned and said, "One more thing." Caminada surprised everyone by producing a witness who claimed to have seen Charlie pour a vial of something into John's beer that night. And though the defense argued that this witness had no proof to back up these claims, and he was simply a person looking to get attention from being such a key part of such a high-profile case, because this was like the, news of the day, Charlie Parton was found guilty and sentenced to death. But that was later commuted to life in prison.
Okay.
So, like, today, you definitely can't wait until, like, the middle of a trial and be like, by the way...
Oh, yeah. Here's the witness. Here's the most important witness.
Yeah, that we didn't tell the defense about.
Prosecution's case, yeah.
Right. Can't do that. There's been some evolution of the court system, and it still has some ways to go. But that is one thing that they realized was not really justice. But...
A cop knows a guy.
Do you have any proof? No.
No, but I drink with a dude.
I saw it with me own eyes, I did. And then he scarpered off.
Yeah.
Now, in fairness, this guy probably did do it because there was a lot of other evidence too. And the fact that the medical people couldn't agree on what killed the guy, I think is more to the incompetence of medical testimony. Well, just the lack of, access to to stuff. Although I was very fucking curious, in 1889, they cut a guy open and this is the chemical in his stomach. It's like, how do you know that? I didn't bother to Google when centrifuges and all that stuff, spectrum analysis was invented, but I think it was after 1889. So
I mean, when you consider and it's true today a little bit, a lot of the chemical a study of individual chemicals in chemistry is literally just applying other shit to a chemical compound and seeing what happens to it, whether it's a color change or temperature or whatever. And then they know what those properties mean. But
you're being nicer than me. Although you're probably right, but I still wonder, how would they account for changes from hitting your stomach acid and exposure to time and that kind of stuff?
Well,
probably not well, because we know science wasn't great.
I mean, it was back then. It was probably well, we added some ink and it started bubbling, and that tells us that it's this shit.
You're being nice. My assumption is they probably taste tested that shit. They probably had one guy in the crime lab. They're your job is to taste the stomach contents of this dead man.
Up until 1935, there was always one dude in the chemistry lab. When he thought no one was looking, he dipped his finger and took a taste of whatever they were working on.
It's probably fucking Caminada. That was part of being a detective. They do that to test the drugs that they say they don't do, but you see it on TV all the time, so it's got to be true. So that was the case of the whatever in the Manchester cab mystery. However, the other case I came across is the one that, for my money, makes Caminada such a great detective to talk about on our show.
He killed someone, didn't he?
Maybe. It doesn't actually say that, but probably. Again, we're talking police work in 1800s,
yeah.
And it had nothing to do with the case. Somebody was just
brilliant. You don't bring somebody on who's genuinely a good cop.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get there. But now I'm picturing him solving one of these cases and doing one of the striking the TV pose where he's and I deduced it all, and somebody came up behind him and said,
it's like if Columbo did the one more thing but then just shot a man.
Right. Well, that's where I'm going. Somebody came up behind him and patted him on the back good work, and he went, oh fuck, smacked him with his club, and he'd be he jumped me. Don't see. Caminada was really good, but he also frightened easily. Anyway, I don't think this case had a name, so I'm going to call it the Phantom Bobby of the Opera, which is just as good as the Manchester cab mystery, and I'll fight you if you say otherwise. Apparently, after a rash of thefts from a local business who sold sheet music, it seemed that every night, or there had been a rash of thefts, it seemed every night that there was a concert schedule, pages of music would turn up missing. And this was enough to bring in, like, Manchester's #1 detective because, like, you know, missing page. In fairness, back then, a piece of paper probably cost like half a year's salary to the average person, but I don't know. Caminada was called in to investigate. He devised a devilishly clever plan to catch the culprit. He had a faux piano box made, which I think actually just means like the body of a piano. But maybe just a crate that a piano comes in. I don't know. I didn't look. I don't care. He had some box made and fitted with eye holes, like multiple sets, so he could move around and get a good view. On the night of the next concert, he climbed inside said box and then had the whole thing shipped to the venue and placed in the backstage area of the concert hall. No one there knew Caminada was present. It was like one of these things where he arranged like a third party to deliver him, and nobody witnessed him get in. So this wasn't like a whole big sting operation. This was him in a box with one delivery man that knew what the fuck was going on, maybe. You'd think you'd be like, wow, this piano rattles around like a sack of potatoes instead of a piano. Weird. He watched as the musicians tuned their instruments before departing for the stage. The only person who stayed behind was the music hall's librarian. After the first intermission, when the musicians came and went, he was once again left alone in the room with the librarian. It was during the second half of the performance when Caminada observed the man slipping a few pieces of paper into his pocket. So as it turns out, the person who did it was the man who had the opportunity to do it. Yet Caminada and this brilliant plan had proven too much for the master thief, whose cover was now blown. Again, nobody thought, like, maybe they're being stolen by the one person who's in the room. And presumably they asked him, and he was like, nah, it wasn't me. And they're like, fuck, well, it's got to be somebody else. Fortunately for the librarian, before Caminada had extricated himself from the prop box, the performance ended and the musicians came back into the room. And then a bunch of them left their equipment on top of the box, and everybody closed up for the night. So with the stuff piled atop his hidey hole, Caminada was unable to actually get out of said piano box. So he was like, haha, it worked brilliantly. Ah, fuck, I'm stuck. And the thief apparently went home. So when a night janitor did eventually come by, Caminada called out to the man. And like any sane person working alone on a night shift, the janitor assumed the voice he heard was a ghost, and he ran a fucking way. So, eventually, Caminada was rescued from his spot in the box, and he did end up apprehending the dastardly music thief.
You remember when Sherlock Holmes and Watson fucking trapped themselves in a fucking puzzle room?
Piano, yeah. Which seems like a whole lot of hassle to catch somebody stealing a couple pages of music here and there, but it's a story of a detective so brave and cunning.
You're like fucking malnourished and like cold and shivering. Like, you're busted.
The next concert wasn't for 2.5 months. He survived by eating his shoes, and most of the time when he had to pee, he got it out of the eye holes.
Solved the case by deliberating with rats.
So yeah, it seems like overkill for a music theft case, but it also proves his brave cunningness, and you can no longer deny that he was definitely the greatest investigator who has ever lived. So like a lot of our stories, the actual moral of this episode is that not very long ago, police work was so bad that just doing basic investigation made you a legendary hero who inspired the stories that we've passed down for generations. Because, again, I wanted to point out, when people call him the real-life Sherlock Holmes, they don't mean, like, Sherlock Holmes stories were out, and this detective's like, man, this guy is just like Sherlock Holmes. No, this guy came first, and their very real speculation is that Sherlock Holmes was at least in part based on Caminada. Which is hilarious to me when your evidence of that is a story about him locking himself in a piano and not being able to get out, and somebody thinking he was a fucking ghost and actually running away and leaving him there. Like, you, very Sherlock Holmes. And you open with, like, he always got his ass kicked in the streets. And it's like, yes, I can definitely see the connection that people drew. So when I, like, heard that there's very, like, a lot of people think that Sherlock was based on him, and then you read the caliber of detective work. Again, I mean, not bad. I'm sure you were expecting, because we normally do this where we slip into a case where he, like, just horrendously misidentifies a whole bunch of people that get hanged, and then you're like, oh, wait, they didn't do it. I didn't come across anything like that, although I'm sure he miscalculated on one or two cases.
I mean, to be fair, I was expecting a death, but I thought it would be more like he tried to drop a cage on top of a thief or something, and the cage was too small, and it hit him in the head and broke his neck.
Where the thief started to walk away, and it just cut him in two.
Just ribbons.
Chief Constable shows up. My God, man, what happened here? Be like, he was coming right at me.
Self-defense. Bobby, what the hell?
I had thought he was two midgets in a trench coat. I was wrong. Like, it happens. Good work.
This is what we call deduction.
But yeah, that's what I got. Like, I have one collection of Sherlock Holmes stories, and I may get it out and scour it for, like, the case of the urine-soaked piano.
I mean, most of those things were like the case if he was bored and on opium, and then Moriarty showed up. That's a lot of Sherlock Holmes. It's great. I live for that, like, detective story shit, but it's very, he milked that shit in a time where a lot of writers were not, given that sort of pass to just like, hey, just keep writing about this fucking guy. He didn't stop.
Right.
Yeah. And then people begged him to stop.
I imagine he had to get a lot like Stephen King with his horror, where like, his publishers are like, we need another detective story. He's like, I don't know how to make him fucking stop. Or like if you ever watched Bones, where like they got to the same, and we liked that show. We liked it all. Me and Tara liked it all the way to the end of that run. And then it turned out that the one actor's kind of a piece of crap. But anyway, like, they set this precedent early on in the show where the crimes would, like, they would open with a bizarre crime, and it had to be something kind of like, oh, what the fuck, because they had to, have the world's best forensic team, like, on it to solve it. So it couldn't just be like,
who just so happens to be a detective who, like, she looks at the bones and will go fucking put the cuffs on him.
Do you know, when I was going through, because my degree's in criminal justice, and at least 3/4 of that class were people that wanted to be, because Bones wasn't out at the time, but CSI was real big.
Yeah.
And so, like, 3/4 of the people wanted to be CSI. Like, I want to do CSI. And it's like, you do know that it doesn't actually work like that fucking at all. Like, if you're a DNA expert, you're in the lab, like,
your
running
life.
DNA. You're not going out and, like, interviewing.
You may have to testify.
Oh yeah, probably have to testify.
So
but that's
you're in the worst worlds of the justice system there, a fucking courtroom and a lab.
And detective work, in fairness, detective work does seem interesting to me. And I've recently, that's what we've been watching on Netflix, is all these like cold case things and like how they put it together. But you're really mostly just going out and talking to people and gathering stuff and letting other people
stories like Sherlock Holmes and TV shows. They make detective work seem like the coolest shit ever. But like, I mean, like I've read enough like detective books about like stories about real detectives trying to solve murders, and you like if it's a good night for them, it's an open and shut, like, and there's no mystery, like they don't use their brain for it. It's like, oh, he definitely killed her because he's the only one who could kill her, and
he's standing over the body stabbing her when we showed up.
And he confessed like immediately. If it's something you can't solve, it's hell.
Yeah,
because it's like you're on the case for weeks, and
Or
every
months or
day,
years.
and every day you're away from when the crime took place is less to go off of.
Well,
usually.
that's the thing is after your initial and I don't want to take anything away. They do a lot of work and a lot of hard work, but a lot of it is more like trying to connect a person's social network and praying that the culprit was in it. Yeah. And if they're not, that's when, like you said, you're pretty well fucked. Like now we've got DNA, so you pray that there's some DNA that matches somebody. But if you can't find any or it doesn't match anything, a lot of detective work is sitting on your ass, hoping that one day you get a call that's a lead that you can then. And again, there's a lot to it. It's definitely a skill, and it definitely takes,
Well, it's like it's a skill, but it's a skill of like there has to be some cleverness to be a good detective, but I think it's also a lot of tenacity and just
definitely
like stubbornness, because like you see Sherlock Holmes stories and stuff. And it's like, oh, he's a genius, and he's going up against criminal masterminds and putting together all these sophisticated patterns and shit. And, like, I was just talking about the Ted Bundy documentary, but I've been watching a lot more. And the cops who catch these guys, they're not, Sherlock Holmes sleuths. Like, it's not some fucking... like, and then I found the thing that broke the case. It's like, no, they fucked up, and I happened to be paying attention.
Right. Well, that's like you said, and it's tenacity, and it's paying attention and narrowing down what you're paying attention to. It's all a skill, but it's way different than like TV, because it would be boring as fuck.
It's not a romantic skill. It's a fucking grind.
Right.
And I do respect it, but it's not what you imagine.
No, and you can tell, because I know you watch those kind of shows too. You see these people, and a couple of the ones that we've been watching have been serial killers ones, and it's refreshing to watch them where they're not really talking so much about the killer. They're talking about the investigation that caught the killer. So there's overlap there, of course, but you see these guys, and some of them it's like, I got assigned this case when it was like my first homicide, and then they solved it like 3 years after the person retired, but they were still like coming in voluntarily because they wanted to and it's like, my marriage fell apart, my kids hate me, but we got the fucker. And it's like and you get it, because some of these people, a lot of them, the one guy, who was it, the Zodiac killer, killing young kids and horrible, like torture killing that, not just like murder. I would be the same way. If that's my case, I'm not fucking giving up on that.
I mean, I think it's part of the thing that makes you the person who can do that job, but it is also, like you said, it's the thing that can ruin your life.
Yeah, you're sacrificing a lot.
Is because you have this like hound dog mentality about it. Like, you get laser focused on the scent, and you can't be broken away from it. And like that, that's good. But once you're in that position where it's like, I am the last, if anybody's going to catch him, it's got to be me. And that has to be probably pretty tough to deal with. And I wouldn't be able to drop it after I retired if I had like a fucking serial murder.
Right,
that
especially
never got solved. I would be
knowing
obsessed.
that they're out there and possibly still killing people, which was the case that I'm sure you're probably familiar with the Zodiac killer, because he's one of the more famous ones.
I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard of the man.
But I didn't really realize that. Really, the only reason they caught him, the cases went cold, and for like 20 years, and then like a lot of these cases, the killer had an ego, and he wrote back out to the cops like, hey, but I'm going to do this again if you just try to stop me.
The Zodiac never got caught. The BTK.
Oh, that's the one I'm thinking. BTK. Yeah.
The BTK, and I've talked about him before. He didn't just write back. He asked them, if I send you a floppy drive,
that
can
was
you
hilarious.
trace it?
And they're like,
no, go for it, dog.
Then they got it, and it's like it had his name on it and where he typed the document.
Yeah, because he typed it up in his church.
And it's hilarious to me because he was so good at covering his tracks, and then he asked them instead of just like Googling it. I get that it was kind of before Google was this big, but there's about 1 million ways he could have found out if you can trace a floppy, but he was just fucking lazy. He was like,
Yeah, he was an old man. He was a dumb fucking old man.
Yeah.
But that is something that we're dealing with a little bit more now, is like, I just watched a documentary series about the Golden State Killer, he was killing for a long time, and they just caught him when he was like a few years ago, like 2018. And he was old as shit, but
he's
DNA,
the ex-cop, right?
Yeah. And the DNA was 100% match, but you couldn't get that until, today's technology.
There was, and I think it's a longer file or a longer series because I think it's been around forever, but Netflix has Cold Case Files, but it only has like 7 episodes. And I think it must be like they have, or they just called it the same thing as another series that's out there. Most of them were that. They were crimes or horrible murders, and most of them were multiple murders. Some of them were just single victim murders. But they got DNA evidence, and they had DNA testing for some of them, but it was like extremely rudimentary, and it wouldn't match. Or a lot of the time, like I said, DNA is great if the person that did it has DNA on file.
Yeah.
If it's like their first murder, there's a good chance that they don't have DNA on file. And then so they would sit and they would follow these leads for years and years and years, and they would go completely cold. And then 20 years later, somebody would like look at the case and say, hey, we got some DNA here. The technology's better. Let's run it. And they'd run it and be like, oh, here's the guy. And it's always was somebody that they had looked at but just couldn't prove, which has to be frustrating as fuck. But yeah,
I was going to say about the Zodiac was like, there were like 3 strong suspects that I think, somewhere around there, that people were really like, this was probably the guy. And like the people leading those investigations was like, they were probably sure of it.
Sure.
But, you couldn't prove it, and that's got to sting.
Except for, you would have to remind yourself, though, and that's what we talk. I don't think we have made it sound like detective work is just waiting for the criminal to catch himself or something, or the DNA to fall in your lap, because it's not. Because even getting that DNA, that certainly helps, but if they didn't have all the investigations already pointing to this person from back then, that's what completes the case. When you can say, look, we had all this circumstantial evidence back then, and here's the timeline that we were able to piece together but couldn't prove. This puts them at the scene, and it's like, ta-da. Like, it'd still be very, very hard if you were like, yeah, we never suspected this guy at all. Here's his blood. Like, maybe you'd get the conviction. But I can't imagine how frustrating that had to be. Yeah. And still is. This guy wasn't that. This guy was, I'm going to hide in a box. Yeah. And like I said, the funniest part to me... So maybe
some of you so-called detectives thought outside the box, like our boy here, and got inside the box, then, you wouldn't be spending years trying to catch fucking serial killers. Because
did anybody ever try to drive out to like Makeout Point and hide in the back seat of the car in a giant piano box?
I'm just imagining like a serial killer trying to like commit a killing in the woods, and a cop is like he's pretending to be a tree. But he gets stuck.
He's like, I can't.
Got the roots. Why did I put roots on the costume?
Oh, that does remind me of one we were watching recently where it was just a random, I think it was in Detroit. Somebody or some people were driving around and just randomly like shotgunning people down at night. Like they'd wait till they could get somebody that was alone. No witnesses. They were very good at that. And then they'd just shoot them. There was like no connection. Like the victims were all different, both men and women, ages. It was literally just an opportunity crime. And they narrowed it down, and they got an informant. It was one of these like biker gang type people that's like, hey, this person's bragging about like this woman he killed. And shockingly, even when you hang out in like those druggy biker killer gang circles, if you start talking about gunning down random people on the street, there's people that'll be like, hey, that's not cool.
I mean, well, there's a reason why, like, you know, if serial killers go to prison, just because they're serial killers doesn't mean they're at the top of the social order in jail. A lot of times, you know, they're firmly at the bottom because, like, a lot of criminal circles are like, you know, yeah, we're fucked up, but we're not like you.
Yeah, we killed for a reason. Like,
I had drug turf to protect you, fucking maniac.
Yeah. So anyway, they like got tipped off and they started like watching. It was two guys, and they were pretty fucking sure it was them. So they put like 24-hour surveillance on them, and one night, like, they saw them get into a car with this big duffel bag that looked like it probably had a shotgun in it and just start driving randomly around the city. Like, they clearly weren't going anywhere. And they had all these unmarked cars trying to tail them, like, just like in the movies where it's like you don't want to get made because they didn't want them to know they were in surveillance. But they were like, we cannot let them out of our sight because they're actively looking for somebody to shoot.
Totally. Like, yeah, and that is something that is also kind of underplayed, I think, in movies and shows, is like being a good tail is probably pretty tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And they said they kept like seeing them. They would pass like a person on a bicycle and they'd slow way down. And the cops, you know, at any given point, they would only have like maybe one car in view of them because they didn't want to make it obvious. But they were trying to make it obvious that the car was in view because they needed them to not feel like they were alone. Yeah. But they talked about it. They were all, because they're talking over the radios, and they were like scared to death somebody was going to get murdered in front of them. But legally, they had no ability to pull them over without completely blowing their case. And it was funny because they talked to the lead detective afterward. You know, he was like flying to try to get into the area to try to like think of something. And eventually the guys just gave up and went home. And they're like, whatever. Well, like that night or the next day or something, the whoever's at the top of the chain, you know, you have the lead detective, but there's still like a chief of police or whoever, was like, yeah, they ordered the guys to, you know, to raid on the apartments and, you know, serve a warrant and arrest them. And he was pissed because he's like, we do not have anything to like to arrest them on. And now they know that we think it's them. Yeah. And fortunately, one of the two guys completely fucking ratted on the other guy. And if he hadn't, you know, they probably wouldn't have been able to do shit. But
there's a lot of tenacity. There's a lot of chance.
That was the first time, and I've read a lot of these stories, and like I said, I've been through the school and through police academy, so we did a lot of studies too. I had never heard of and I'm sure it's not the only time it's ever happened, but an active investigation on a suspected serial killer that you think they're out stalking for somebody, but you don't really know a way to stop them. Like they certainly weren't going to let them shoot somebody in front of them, but they're like, we can't pull the trigger too soon on this. Like if we,
I mean, it has to be almost this fucking
nightmare of like
annoying like dance you have to partake in, where it's like they have to feel crowded enough to not do this, but I have to basically spend, you know, however fucking long until they get tired of it, making sure that they don't do anything.
Yeah.
You know,
right. And the problem was it was a shotgun and they were using a birdshot. So as far as I know, and I could be wrong on this, but because I was thinking, it's like, well, you know, invent some, you know, hopefully they make some kind of traffic mistake and then pull them over and then try to like get that gun. Like hopefully it's not, but it's like, but if they're legally carrying it or whatever. But in the case of a shotgun shooting, you know, I said birdshot, but not necessarily birdshot, but pellets. It's not like a bullet where you can like test the striations, I don't think. And so like you'd have very hard time linking that gun to the crimes. So that really wouldn't do much. Like I said, it'd be really hard to not blow the fact that you're investigating these guys.
It would be a delicate case, but I think also the behavior of those crimes, from how it sounds, you could still put it together based off of, you know, like, people don't just fucking drive around with a shotgun ready with like birdshot.
Yeah, you know? But I mean, it's court. Yeah, a good defense attorney. They did have other stuff with the reason that they had them under 24-hour surveillance as they were watching the guys, and they were at their apartment. And one of the guys went out and threw away a bag of trash and went back in, and they went and collected it, because once it's in the dumpster, you don't need a warrant. It's considered abandoned property. Same reason if you see somebody throwing out a cool ass sofa, go ahead and take it. It's probably not full of lice or bed bugs.
Or murder.
So anyway, they got this trash, and when they dumped it out and were going through it, they found like a map of the city with all the locations of the murders or shootings like marked out. And they're like, well, that's a pretty good...
Why would you just throw that away?
Why would you have it?
Like, why would you not... If you did it at all, one is like, don't do that, but burn it. Like, don't fucking, like, what the fuck?
But like they said, because you hear that and you think, oh, arrest him right then and there. And he's like, but there's a lot of people out there when there's a... Because by this point, the shootings
these are all my great tourist spots.
Well, yeah, by that point, the fact that random people were getting gunned down in the streets was kind of big in the news. And a lot of people just follow that kind of stuff. So they're like, it was a very good clue to us, especially given the tip that they were bragging about shooting people. But it wasn't enough to, like, kick the door in, or at least he didn't think so. And then after that close call where they were out and seeming to be looking for their next victim, somebody is like, yeah, we can't risk that again, which is probably the right call. It worked out. But my whole point was, I can't imagine being a cop following a person that you're like 98% sure is the killer, and they're acting exactly like the killer would act, but you're like, we don't quite have it yet.
Yeah.
So that had to be fun.
And this was fun.
So that's almost a double topic, because I think I spent as long talking about this TV show I watched that I'm not going to source because I forget what it's called. But
it was all Columbo. The show brought to you by Columbo.
One more thing.
Yeah. One more thing. It's over. So we'll be back next week, hopefully. With more fucking shit.
That actually makes his catchline that much more badass. One more thing. It's over.
Bang.
Yeah, he just shoots him. He doesn't let him go to court.
Yeah. That would have been a great series finale. Dude,
you can't do that. Like,
Columbo's been pushed too far.
I would like it to end where his gun accidentally goes off. They turn him into Leslie Nielsen and Naked Gun.
That's like, oh, one more thing. Shit.
They're like, damn it, Columbo. We told you to retire. We knew you were...
Columbo, you geriatric fuck. You fucking shot our last witness.
It's just the chief sobbing as he has to put Columbo in jail with all the people over the years he's locked up, knowing he's going to get murdered. Oh, well. Anyway, I want to go to bed. I'm old.
Yeah. Goodbye.